exciting.
There we go.
All right. That's awesome. Thanks for setting that up. Oh, I said okay on that, and then it totally shut off the screen. There. You guys got the slides? All right. NfoLD Steering Committee number 2 with the new co-lead. Welcome, everybody. Great to see everybody's face. So as a reminder, I figured I'd outline again what the whole goal of the two, having a steering committee meeting or an NfoLD group meeting every month. So the idea is to encourage open discussions and accelerate this life detection, right? So again, on the odd month, which is not this month, we'll have the SC meeting and life detection forum. So that would be next month in November. Expect to see Ricky Arvalo. He's going to be the tech dev representative. He's going to give a 10 to 15 minute talk on peptide biosignatures and laser desorption mass spec. And then the research side of things, I'll be presenting. This is not meant to sound or look like self-promotion, but we needed fast volunteers. So I'll be presenting mass spectrometry-based proteomics on psychrophilic bacteria to look for peptide motifs in life detection. But this month, so we're now, as it's October, right? Even months, this is our think tank. And again, the goal is to get, eventually it's gonna be getting NASA mission and headquarters with real-time educated life detection advice. So we're supposed to do this back and forth with NASA headquarters. And it's a little different. Today, we're gonna have a decadal overview to kind of get us all the same foundation so we can start off together on the right foot. We're gonna have a talk by David Smith, and then we'll have the relevance aspect of the decadal to astrobiology is gonna be presented by my co-lead, Alfonso. So first I'm gonna do some of our little updates with steering committee that we're supposed to. I'd like to announce that there's a postdoctoral program, right? The NPP is due November 1st, so encourage your postdocs to start applying. And then March 1st and July 1st are the next 2 opportunities. And then Alexis just sent this out today. There is a tenure track faculty position in planetary science at CU Boulder. It looks right up the alley. So if you're looking for a tenure track position, that job has now been posted. Alexis, feel free to tap in if you want to say where it's posted. Heather, you had a hand raised.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to say there's another planetary related job that's come open at New Mexico Tech in their chemistry department, and they're hoping to get someone who with organic geochemistry experience as well.
Excellent.
Cool. Yeah, I posted this one. It's very broad, very broad. I think they're very open to diverse spectrum of applications and don't know what they want because so many units are involved in the hiring. But I believe this position was prompted by Bruce Jakosky's retirement and related. And Bruce was a huge influence on our campus in astrobiology and helmed 10 years of NAI here before he then led Maven. So I think that's some of the historical context, what the future looks like. I don't know, but I got that message today. I went, oh, fascinating. I should get this out. So I thought this would be one forum to share that.
That was perfect timing, Alexis. So I just saw it in Slack. So I'll emphasize Slack. A lot of us are on Slack frequently, checking it and communicating with one another. All right. Many of us either are in currently or have just recently done a working group related to life detection or a workshop. So what's coming up is we have the Outer Planet Assessment Group. If you have questions, actually, I don't know who to point you towards that. Is that Heather? Are you part of that? Yes.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and yeah, and I also have to present about the Ocean World's analog field site.
Yep. We'll get there in a second.
At OPAG. Yeah. So you'll see me there. Okay.
And then the Mars Exploration Program Analysis Group, that's October 26th. And the current workshop that's going on right now is the future of omics in Antarctica. And then we just finished the Ocean World Analog Field Site Assessment, of which in this little brief, whatever recap, we'll give you some information as to what occurred there. So some of the tips we got during the Ocean World's assessment from Mary, there is a new requirement for fieldwork proposals. She emphasized to read C1. Again, these slides, you can look at them online or look at the details as to what she's pointing out, but we're trying to reduce the impact of sites, encouraging and demanding, I guess I should say, the relevant permits, And we're trying to eliminate discrimination and harassment. So again, read C1 or else your proposal will get kicked back. So you want to follow all the directions there. The other thing she brought up is the new take on peer review for proposals, DAPR, so dual anonymous peer review. So the idea is that the proposer and the reviewers are both anonymous now. And this is only during the scientific evaluation of the proposal. So they'll scientifically evaluate the thrust of the proposal, and then they'll look into the expertise and resources. That part's not anonymized, but that won't happen until they've written the actual panel summary. I think it's a great system. So they've already seen really great things as far as getting more diverse people coming in, new early career people getting proposals accepted. So kudos to NASA. All right, other little announcements. The exobiology program. So I think most of us know this, it's a no due date system. And she emphasized that external peer reviews are going to be more important than ever. She didn't go into details about that, but it seemed like an important part. So if you're reviewing, please do it well. Habitable Worlds is now a dual anonymized peer review. So it's a DAPR system. You need to read the rules before you start working through your format of your proposal, because 20% of the proposals this last round were non-compliant simply by missing some of these little new details in the proposal. So make sure you follow the rules there. I don't think there's anything new. I'm only pointing out new things. There's a lot of other programs that are specific to life detection, but these are ones that she emphasized have, slight changes that are going on right now. I think we're all familiar with ICAR. Step 1 was due August 1st, so that wasn't too long ago, and step 2 will be announced relatively soon as to who's going to be able to go on for step 2. And then the newest addition, the interdisciplinary research in earth science, there's a new ocean world research at the interface. The NOI, or the notice of intent, was October 14th. So hopefully we got some people here in NfoLD to participate. Proposal is going to be November 16th. The key thing that I noted from this, it's a lot of, it's fundamental advances in earth systems, but it must be based on remote sensing data. There's other details that are worth reading, but it also seemed like a really neat opportunity to get ocean world life detection started up. This I just wanted to show because I thought it was cool. Mary presented it. This is just showing the connections between all the different RCNs at NASA, and I wanted to point out that NfoLD was in the center. That was all I was pointing out with that. She did not win it. She did not word it that way, but I will. Thanks to the nugget makers, our recent NASA nugget has been sent out. It is over on the left. We encourage early career people to participate. Jennifer Keefe is going to lead the next one. The paper is Geological Diversity and Microbiological Potential of Lakes on Mars. So really cool paper, very, very new, 15th of September. So if you're interested in participating, it's a great way to get your name out there and practice kind of public relations, etc. But again, reach out to Jennifer Keefe via email or Slack. She's active on Slack. And Heather's going to give us a recap of the Ocean World's Analog Site Selection Workshop.
Yeah, we had a really great week. We had 17 different people who are affiliated with NfoLD at the meeting, including folks who are here right now, and including Brooke, my co-lead. We had 4 steering committee members. So we had 61 people come to Denver to talk about this. This is an effort that follows on work that was done by the kind of Mars community last decade, trying to develop some sort of framework or rubric, if you will, to evaluate field sites. We took a slightly different approach than that workshop did, where as a SOC, we had a whole array of different options that we gave people. And what we were trying to get people to really do with these options of assessing a field site is to really think hard about the criteria that are necessary for their science question. And we have a couple of different reasons that we wanted to emphasize that is to make sure that your field site actually does match the investigation you're trying to do by its characteristics, not just by how it looks. There's interest in trying to diversify the number of field sites that we go to so that we don't, cause a lot of impact on some of the really pristine ones. I think that's kind of reflected in that new statement for field work that Mary talked about. So there are three things that came out of three outputs that came out of the workshop that you'll be seeing. We're putting together a report right now, and we'll probably have a manuscript that we want to submit in the early part of the next year. We basically workshopped a narrative approach to helping people work through what their questions are and what their field site needs actually would be. And then we use this kind of STM-like matrix where you could go in and score the various features. And then we even have this option of doing a visual graphic like what you see here, which is a pedal plot or a radar plot, where you can see in the different quadrants, different criteria by their category: science, impact, fidelity of the site to your ocean world of interest, and logistics. And the area underneath those graphs where you can see the blue, yellow, and red show you how well your site of interest might actually meet your needs. So like I said, we have a couple of things coming out. We have a report that goes to headquarters with some programmatic recommendations, most of them related to field work. And we also had some discussions about database needs that are pending in the community to help us make these field site selections well. And of course, as I said, there will be the manuscript coming forward. And thank you to all the SC members who were part of this, whether you're on the call right now or not. It was really fantastic to have people there. And thank you for all of your help, not only in the workshop, but with the manuscript going forward.
Thanks, Heather. All right, so as I mentioned before, today's technically we're on the month that is our think tank where we're providing feedback, but this is again kind of a kickoff meeting to get everybody started and on the same page with the astrobiology aspects of the decadal. And I'll pass it off to Alfonso.
So yeah, so this is going to be the main event for today. We got two short presentations on the Decadal Survey, what it is, what it does, why is it important for us. We are fortunate to have David Smith give the first presentation. David is at the Space Studies board at the National Academy of Sciences, and he was the study director for the survey, and he's been in previous decadal surveys and in other activities from the National Academies that are relevant to NASA. And then I'll give a short presentation as well about my experience. I was a panelist in this survey, so I'll go a bit more in detail about the astrobiology aspects of it and a bit of the mechanisms of how the discussions went about. If you go to the next slide, before we go to David's, this is just a summary of some of the results in the polls that we took last month and in the past few weeks, which essentially shows the diversity of expertise that we have in this steering committee and of interests, both in terms of our research and technology and the types of environments that we're interested in. And this is relevant for a number of things. One is because I cannot emphasize how important the Decadal Survey is as a programmatic document. It really is it lays out the important science and technology and missions that are going to take place in the next 10 years, and sometimes even beyond the next 10 years. But it also outlines what the community thinks NASA should be putting emphasis on when it comes to research and technology development. And so since everybody in the steering committee should have something to find in the Decadal Survey that is relevant to their the research and their technology development, especially when it comes to submitting proposals. Referencing the Decadal Survey is one of those things that you can point to show how your proposal is relevant to NASA. And so I encourage everybody to become familiarized with it. And so to get started, I will just introduce David Smith. He will tell us generically about the Decadal Survey and the mechanisms and how it works and what it does. And then I'll move on and I'll continue with some additional few more slides. David, feel free to take it away.
Okay, I can get my slides up. Let's see, sure. Okay, and I'm on the wrong page. Okay, so well, thank you for inviting me. Since the report was released early this year, we've done so many briefings, I can't begin to count. It seems like there's at least one every week. And I know there's one next week because we're going to APL to speak to the leadership there about our results. But anyway, I'm going to talk about the mechanics and the basics, why we do decadal surveys, what they are. A decadal survey is basically a science prioritization process. It was developed in the astrophysics community back in the 1960s, and it proved to be very effective, and other communities have taken them up subsequently. So what a survey does is it basically assesses the status of entire scientific discipline. What have they achieved recently? Based on what the recent achievements are, they identify the key scientific questions that could be addressable in the next decade. It then prioritizes the initiatives, and initiatives could be missions, or it could be building a telescope or a lab or something that could address the most important questions in the next decade. And then more recently, the major things we recommend. So in NASA speak, it's the medium class missions and the large class missions, flagship missions. They have to undergo a technical risk and cost evaluation process. And the Academies hires an external contractor to do that. And then the surveys themselves, they're conducted independently of the sponsoring agencies by the National Academies. And National Academies, for those of you not familiar with it, was chartered by Congress in 1863 to provide advice to the federal government on request, in addition to being an honorary society. So why are decadal surveys important? Well, I think if you look at the text right at the bottom of the screen, sponsoring agencies and Congress view the surveys as formal statements of priorities by the US space science community, and have stated in many, many occasions their intent to follow the highest priorities. Now, the decadal surveys are advice. They're not cast in stone. Agencies don't have to follow them. It's part of the input, but it's an input that is very, very powerful. And to give you a flavor of how Congress, for example, regards the surveys, the text in yellow in the middle, the NASA Authorization Acts of 2005 and 2008 collectively mandated that each NASA science division have its own decadal survey, and also a midterm review of that survey. And that the Academies needs to have this cost and technical risk evaluation for anything it recommends. So, talking about decadal surveys, these are the ones in the space sciences. So the first was done in 1963 by the astronomers. The most recent ones are shown, the covers are shown on the right-hand side of the screen. So the astronomers just released their survey last year. So that was the 7th, and those have been highly effective. Planetary Science has done 3, the most recent vision, Origins, Worlds and Life, and that was released this year. There are 2 underway right now. Solar and Space Physics is basically ramping up, and the biological and physical research is sort of midway through theirs. And then Earth Science is trailing the pack, and their next one is probably not due till the end of this decade. So decadal survey, like any other Academy task, is driven by any other Academy study, is driven by the statement of task. It's the terms of reference that are given to the authoring committee by the sponsors. And it's basically what the sponsors have come through an iterative process with the National Academies for the committee to do. It basically says, we want you to do this, that, and the other. And it may give guidance on what we don't want you to do, or how you should do what they want you to do. So for this most recent survey, it was a little bit different. Every survey is different from its predecessor, and the surveys done in different communities all differ quite strongly from each other. But based, for us, planetary science, astrobiology, the things that were similar to Vision and Voyages, which was released, 10 years ago. We identified top-level science questions, research activities. We prioritized medium and large class space missions. We are very cognizant of the need for an optimum balance, which has many different dimensions between mission sizes, ground and space-based activities, strategic activities as opposed to PI-led activities, et cetera, talk about technology and infrastructure needs. And we also have decision rules. What to do if something changes. Typically, the budget is less than you'd anticipated. What gets cut first? And then the new survey had several features that were very different from the predecessor. It has a discussion of state of profession that planetary science hadn't done before in its two previous surveys. We were asked to organize around top-level science questions rather than destinations. So if you open Vision and Voyages, it has a chapter on Mars, a chapter on the giant planets, a chapter on ocean worlds, et cetera, et cetera. If you go into the origins, worlds, and life, you won't find a Mars chapter or Venus chapter or Moon chapter. You'll see chapters organized around science topics. So that was a major difference between what we'd done previously, and it added some complications to the process. We were also asked to give a greater emphasis to astrobiology. We were asked to discuss planetary defense, which was a new topic for us, really, and then to be more aware of human exploration activities and cooperative activities between the science and human exploration parts of NASA, and also be more cognizant of what's happening internationally with other space agencies. So our tasks are done by committees, and most decadal surveys have a sort of two-layer structure. They have a leadership group, which I tend to call the steering group, and they're the people in overall charge, and they define the scope of how the committee is going to respond to its task. They're involved in the formulation, top-level prioritization and recommendations. And then there's a lower level, but equally important, of panels that support this leadership group. So going back to the steering group itself, had 19 members. They were very experienced people from across the full range of space science and astrobiology disciplines. We also included engineers, people of vast experience in program management, as well as card-carrying planetary scientists and astrobiologists. The first task the steering group addressed was to read all the white papers, to identify the questions around which the rest of the survey would be organized, because we couldn't do anything else until we knew what those key questions were or how we were going to phrase them. Supporting the steering group was the panels. So there were 6 formal panels, which were organized by destination, which might seem contradictory to what I just said. The report will be organized around science topics. But there were things that this destination orientation was required to do beside read the white papers. These guys had to assess all the previously completed mission study reports from the pre-decadal mission concept studies and the science definitions team studies that NASA had previously done, and to figure out what else needed to be done in terms of mission studies to basically give a broad coverage of science topics and to basically form the mission foundations of what might be recommended. Okay, so that's them. So there were 84 people on the panels and 19 people on the steering group. And if you add those two together, you get 103, but there were actually only 97 members altogether, because the the vice chair of each panel, that's the second name in each column. The vice chair also served on the steering group and acted as the conduit of communication between each of the panels and the steering group. Okay, so here's how we organize. So this is basically organization in space and time. We set up the steering group and the 6 panels. They did their stuff initially, define the 12 questions, and then define extra mission studies that might be needed. And then they basically dissolved themselves, almost underwent a metamorphosis. And we reformed everybody under these working groups. You will see there was one for each of the science chapters and one for each of these 6 boxes at the lower middle of the screen, state of profession, research and analysis. So each of these boxes would basically represent a chapter. It's 12 science chapters. There's 6 chapters dealing with these programmatic issues like state of profession, research and analysis, planetary defense, human exploration, technology and infrastructure. The tour of the solar system was responsive to the statement of task call for a summary of current state of knowledge. And that was really the only part of the report that was written by the panels. So if you go into that chapter, which is chapter 2 in the report, you'll find sections on Mars and Mercury, Venus, Mars, small bodies, etc., etc. Okay, and then all of this stuff, moving to the right, leads to chapter 23, sorry, chapter 22 in the report, which is the overall programmatic recommendations. Okay, so quick summary, some numbers. We received over 500 white papers, which was more than twice what we received in the previous Decadal Survey, which was more than twice what we received in the very first Decadal Survey, when we got about 100. We had 153 panel meetings and 23 meetings of the steering group. They were all done virtually. There was not one single in-person meeting in the whole of the survey. We had presentations from 300 external speakers, either to the steering group or the panels, and some people spoke to multiple panels and the steering group. So some of these things further down on the screen, milestones. We reviewed the white papers, reviewed the mission studies in the autumn of 2020. We identified priority science questions, same time frame. The panels defined 9 additional mission concepts that which they thought required additional study. And NASA went away and got 3 of its centers to do those nine studies, plus JPL agreed to do another one. So we actually had 10 mission studies done for us during the course of the survey. We prioritized the mission concepts for this technical evaluation the spring of 2021. We then, based on the results of that technical review, we down selected the missions again to come with our final set of mission recommendations. We actually wrote the report in the summer, autumn of 2021. It went through the Academy review process late in 21. It went to 23 external reviewers. We got 1,750 written comments back. Each one had to be responded to in writing, and any change made to the report in response to one of those comments had to be cross-referenced. So it was a monstrous task. Anyway, we got it done, and we delivered the report to NASA and NSF, our 2 sponsors, in April. We released the report later in April. And since then, we've been doing briefings and other dissemination activities, probably averaging 1 a week since then. So I don't know if I'm treading on Alfonso's toes here, but these are the 12 questions, and they're organized under 3 themes. So there's origins of planetary systems, basically origin of the planets, why the planets where they are. the worlds and processes, how individual planetary bodies evolve. And then one of the most interest to you guys probably is theme C, life and habitability. And there's 3 questions there. Each question, remember, is a chapter. Each chapter is about 30 pages long. So there's almost 100 pages related directly to astrobiology. And question 11, which is chapter 14 in the report, is probably the one that's most of interest to you guys. And then there's a 12th science question on exoplanets, on how do studies of exoplanets benefit studies of the solar system and vice versa. And then each of the science chapters has a similar format. There's top level questions. So this is chapter 5. So question 2, which is discussed in chapter 5, is to do with accretion in the outer solar system. It defines a series of sub-questions. There's question 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, etc., which defines sub-questions, which are then discussed in that part of the report. And then each of those sub-questions sections end with something called strategic research. And that's what research could be done in the coming decade to address each of the sub-questions. And then if you were to integrate across all 12 science chapters and look at the strategic research, there's certain topics that keep on coming up, and that's critical role of sample return in situ analyses. The fact that we know next to nothing about the ice giant systems, and what we do know basically came in from the Voyager flybys in the 1980s. Importance of primordial processes, interplay between internal and external processes and planetary bodies. Why the different terrestrial planets are so different. And then one's probably of interest to you, how life on Earth emerged and evolved. And then the desire to make substantive progress in the coming decade on determining whether life exists or existed elsewhere in the solar system. And then in chapter 22, where the major programmatic recommendations occur, the report goes back to the 2019 astrobiology strategy and basically takes 3 of its recommendations and reiterates them as something that NASA needs to take particular note of. And the last one on life detection technologies is probably the one of most interest to you. And that is basically it for me. We're aiming to try and get the whole Decadal Survey report printed by Christmas. You can download the prepub, which is available at URL, and all the mission study reports, the things we commissioned, and also the white papers are available at that URL. The white papers were also published by the American Astronomical Society for us, and they can be found in the bulletin of the American Astronomical Society. I think it's the March 2001 issue. And that's it for me. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, David. Let me go through a few additional slides, and then I will open up for questions. I'm really going to go fast because I like people to have time to ask questions if they have them. So can you see my slides?
Yes.
Yes.
So I was involved in the Decadal as a member of one of the panels, the Ocean Worlds and Dwarf Planets panel. And just to give you a bit more insights into how those specific panels work and how they help the steering group, we held panel meetings almost for a year, 40 panel meetings in total, each one lasting for 3 hours, typically on Fridays. Different panels had different schedules, but roughly we all met a similar number of times. And we also there were 13 open sessions. Those were open to the public, in which we discussed a number of interesting topics, including the different RCNs and OPAC and advisory or analysis group recommendations, particularly from OPAC for our specific panel, but NEPAC was sticking to the Mars panel. We discussed light detection technologies, flagship mission concepts, a whole lot of different things. And these sessions were open to everybody, not just to the our own panel. We reviewed the white papers and mission concepts relevant to ocean worlds and submitted recommendations to the steering group in terms of mission priorities and tech development priorities and science priorities and whatnot. And then we provided, as David said, expert to write those chapters, those science questions. To give you a sense of how much community input we went through, we reviewed 125 white papers relevant to ocean worlds and astrobiology and technology. And the papers were reviewed by multiple panel members, discussed by the whole panel, and some of them were flagged for the steering committee for them to take a closer look. And we also reviewed the 7 new frontiers and flagship class mission concepts that were submitted. A couple of things about white papers. This is supposed to be a community-driven effort. Of course, not the entire community cannot be actively involved in Decadal. So for the majority of the community to participate, submitting white papers is the most important activity. White papers can be submitted by anybody. They can include any number of authors from any institutions. They only have guidelines in terms of the template and the number of pages and the topics, but otherwise it's a free format. Typically analysis groups like OPAC and MIPAC and RCNs, those white papers submitted by those bodies, they carry a lot of impact when it comes to any mission recommendations, also science recommendations, because those groups already capture a big chunk of the community. So the Decadal takes whatever recommendations are in those white papers very seriously. But then there was a fair amount of individual, I call it, quote, white papers written by groups of anywhere between 3 and 10 authors that also have a lot of impact in science, because those speak to very specific topics of things like prebiotic chemistry or evolution of life or technology for light detection that the different panels draw. This is great information for the panels to draw information from, and also is a good source of information and text for the writing the white papers, the chapters. And I would say the content of the papers is more important than the number of authors, but of course both matter, because having a lot of people supporting a specific vision or a specific strategy obviously carries a lot of weight. I'm not going to go through this because David already spoke about this. There are 3 chapters that are relevant to life and habitability, and question 11, search for life elsewhere, is specifically relevant for us. I'm not going to go through the details, but I encourage everybody to look at those chapters and look at the questions, because if you write proposals to NASA, you want to point to which questions and priority questions and research questions your research is relevant to, and that's going to show relevance of your proposal. I also encourage you to read those, because in the future there's going to be more Decadal surveys, and this is a good place for anybody who hasn't had experience before with Decadal surveys documents to start reading about them, and also think about which places could be improved in the next iterations. And just to give you an idea of which specific recommendations were captured in the Decadal that are relevant to us, the New Frontiers program, which are the medium class missions, in that program there's a list of missions that are prescribed, so you can only propose to those missions as recommended by the Decadal, which NASA takes generally very seriously, and they follow the guidelines. These are the missions for the New Frontiers 6 program, which is going to come out, we expect, in the next 5 or 6 years or so, because New Frontiers 5, which is going to be the next one, which is already in progress, people already working towards New Frontiers 5. The themes for those missions come from the previous Decadal survey. New Frontiers 6 falls in the new Decadal survey. And as you can see, there are a number of targets that are very relevant to astrobiology and also life detection. A lot of ocean world science, a series sample return mission concept, and Celebus science that emphasizes habitability and life detection, Titan science, Venus science, and in NF7 also missions that target Triton, one of Neptune's moon, as a possible ocean world with a lot of astrobiology interest. So certainly astrobiology was very well represented in the mission recommendations. And then when it comes to flagship, there were 3 basic recommendations. One is to continue with Mars sample return, bring it back That's a top priority for the next decade. There was a recommendation for a new flagship to Uranus orbiter and probe. And then a second recommendation, the second highest priority, is a flagship mission to Enceladus with the top objective of searching for evidence of life. And then there was an additional recommendation for the Mars exploration program after the peak spending of Mars sample return has passed, to start thinking about a $1 million+ mission that would be about new frontiers, about $1 billion mission, I would think, called the Mars Life Explorer. And the concept for that mission is a robotic spacecraft that lands on Mars and studies ground ice deposits, does a number of analyses and searches for specific biosignatures. So you can see life detection is very well captured there. And I just wanted to mention 2 additional recommendations that might be relevant to you. One is the emphasis on research and exploration of subsurface habitability. That's quite pervasive in the astrobiology chapters. So for those of you who do subsurface research, habitability and biosignatures and whatnot, you will find a lot of interesting text in the Decadal. And the other one is just to re-emphasize the life detection technologies and the integration of astrobiology and expertise in all missions that was also recommended. And so it's probably the first time in the Decadals for planetary exploration where astrobiology is so thoroughly and included. And so I know that was a lot of information in a short period of time, but I wanted to give some time for you to ask questions. So feel free to raise your hands and ask anything you want to ask about the process and the contents of the survey.
Can I ask a question? I have both hands raised.
Go ahead. I don't see hands, so go for it.
Okay, yeah, so I know I should already know this, and I've been through this a bunch of times, including the past time, but I still don't really understand how the mission, like we have a bunch of missions, they have to be feasible. I know there's this PMCS review process, and in David's slides, you kind of showed that the first thing was like determining, it seemed like if the missions were feasible, and then everything else was a science consideration. But like if something's not feasible, it doesn't get on the list. And I know that there's ongoing things. So it does seem like it's bounded by reality of like what missions are in there. If it's an impossible mission with wonderful science, it's not in there. So what really happens? Like how do missions get down selected? Is it right at the beginning or is it at the end, or how does it work?
Well, there were basically 3 layers of down selects. So we had things that are already been studied through either the competitive process, NASA Institute, this PMCS process, or prior things that have been studied like Europa Lander. So for the PMCS, there was a NASA competition where people made proposals and there was a down select, and NASA selected 11 of them.
Okay.
And so we had those reports, and then the panels, based on what was in the white papers and their own expertise and so on, came up with probably the number is in the report, in the survey report, but it might be as many as 20 additional ideas that were outlined at the level of, you know, a 4 or 5 page description. And those extra ones, the panels then internally prioritize themselves. So the Mars panel prioritized the Mars missions, and they sent their top priorities to the steering group, and the other panels did the same. Ocean Worlds had its favorite missions. The Venus panel had its favorite additional missions, and they went to the steering group. And from a group of about 20, the steering group selected 9 as being the ones it thought were most promising. That's based on, you know, that's basically on the expertise of the members. You know, remember we had engineers and we had scientists, so it was a very subjective down select. And so those studies were sent off to NASA, and NASA allocated 3 each to APL, JPL, and Goddard. And those studies took about 3 months to do. So we got those studies back in the late spring of 21. We had the 11 PMCS studies. We had the couple of extra ones like Europa Land and so on. And then the steering group went through a second round of deselect. So from that population now of about 25 concepts that had been studied at the level of something like a 50-page study report, they down selected again to about a dozen. And those dozen, or actually it was more than a dozen, it was about 15. And those 15 or so were then shipped off to the Aerospace Corporation, and they did a more detailed technical and cost analysis. And we got their reports back. And then the steering group did a third down select to the ones that appear in the report. So if it's one of the new Frontiers mission, or the Mars Life Finder, or Endurance A, or Europa Orbiter and Pro, those are the ones that came out at the end of this multi-level down select.
So
Okay,
I hope that makes sense.
yeah, that was great. I appreciate it.
It's described in Appendix C in excruciating detail in the survey report.
yeah, it is an involved process, and I can tell you that for the without going into the details of the discussions, it probably took us about 4 to 6 months of internal.
Oh yeah, exactly. I mean, it basically took from, say, January 2021 to, I don't know, August, September 21. So what's that? That's 8 months to actually filter through all these down selects and studies and additional down selects and more studies to come up with what Alfonso showed on his charts.
And I can tell you that there are a lot of things that are considered. There is discussions about the science merits. There's discussions about the technology merits. There are discussions about eventually their cost information that comes out. If something it costs $10 billion, maybe not a good idea. But and this is, I want to emphasize this because this is a place where I think places like RCNs like NfoLD can make an important contribution. For example, for a long time, it's been suggested that life detection technologies are not ready yet for planetary missions. These are the types of conversations that take place in for example, discussions in the Decadal Survey. People make their arguments for why they think technologies are ready and why not. Obviously, it's only a handful of people that have these conversations while the Decadal is happening. But white papers can play a huge role in making the case that, for example, technologies are ready for life detection. I know that, Peter, you sent one because I remember reading it. And so this is ammunition, if you will, for Decadal panelists to make the case whether something is ready or not for a mission. And so it's really important to contribute those white papers. And the same goes for science and whatnot. Brooke.
Yeah, so in reaction to the comment that you just made, Alfonso, about NASA not thinking life detection's necessarily ready for missions.
I didn't say that. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. No, well, I know you don't think that because this is what you do. I'd like to also propose that NfoLD consider that we put together a special issue of instrumentation and life detection strategies, where us, the steering committee, put this together. Now, the other RCN, looking at Ocean Worlds, has already done this and published it. I feel like it's within the last few months. And it's quite powerful, right? Like you said, getting the RCN to come together with a distinct objective is huge.
Absolutely. So NASA doesn't think that the technology is not there yet.
Sorry.
People in the community might think that. And so if you want to counter that point, white papers, publications, reviews, even everything you can think of is a useful thing, because the Decadal speaks for 10 years. So you'll see 3 decadals in your career at the most. And so you really want to participate in these activities to really have a say on what happens in our fields.
I think in particular, since we're life detection over some of the other RCNs, like we have a very strong public appeal too. So we could make it a potentially more popular special issue of some sort.
Yeah, there's a lot of public appeal, but there's also a lot of eyes on life detection because it's a very high risk, high reward type of, or it's perceived
Skepticism.
very high risk, high reward science. So you really want to have the strongest possible message.
So let me just interject. When the survey co-chairs and I were at JPL a couple of weeks ago, one of the things they showed us was one of their labs where they're putting together basically an integrated life detection suite that could go on a spacecraft. Needs to be miniaturized more, but people at centers are busy at work on designing what might go on Enceladus Orbilander or the Mars Life Explorer.
Yeah.
That was my lab, by the way, David. Remember me?
Oh, it was you? Yes, I thought I recognized.
I was the guy talking to you.
And I couldn't remember the name of your.
Yeah, that was me. Anyway, yes. Thank you.
What's it called?
Oh, right.
Owls.
Owls. Yes, owls. That's right. Yeah.
Alexis is a part of the project too.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, David, I do have a question for you. If nobody else has questions, how are the steering group members and the chairs for different panels selected, and the co-chairs?
Basically the same process we use for any committee. There is an established process, and it begins with collecting a lot of names from a lot of different groups. So the three academies themselves are broken down into sections based on discipline, and we're supposed to contact, each section has a liaison who is basically a point of contact between an academy study and that particular group of academy members. And we ask them for suggestions. That's one mechanism. We ask the Space Studies Board. We ask Committee on Astrobiology and Planetary Science. We basically ask anybody. We had a nomination process. You could nominate people or self-nominate people, and we got a lot of input that way. We also got a lot of suggestions during the organizing meeting we held for the Decadal Survey, which was in September 2019, and we held that at Caltech. And so we got more suggestions there. So we ended up with a huge number of names, and then we have to come up with we wanted to have co-chairs, so we need to have a complementary group, pair of people, and it turned out, after many weeks and months of investigating, that Robin Canup and Phil Christensen were complementary in so many dimensions. They were basically, they were head and shoulders above competition.
Okay.
But we had many names, and then we seriously looked at probably a dozen people, and Robin and Phil were the obvious candidates.
Okay.
And then members of the steering group and the panels, panel chairs. Panel chairs came about more between the discussion. Of course, we had all the suggestions from all these groups I've mentioned, but the panel chairs and I went through all these names we had, and that was mainly how the panel chairs were selected. And then the panel membership was then, again, we had this huge list of names, and we just went through them and selected the panel members.
Yeah, okay.
It was a long process. It took, we got the co-chairs on board in, I think it was about May of 2020, and we had the final appointments probably in August or September of that year. So it was a 3 or 4 month process to get it all done.
We're at the top of the hour, so I don't know if there are any further questions. I did have a lingering one for David, but if you have to go, David, that's okay.
No, I'm fine. I can keep going as as long
I have
as
a
you
question too.
put up with me.
Let me ask you then just one more thing, because you mentioned there is going to be a midterm review of the decadal. That
Yes.
happens 5 years into the decade.
Approximately 5 years, yeah.
Is community input expected in that midterm review, or is it aside from any community input?
One of the hallmarks of a decadal survey is, a vast amount of external participation. That's why we have, a huge group of people, hearing group and panels. We have white papers. We do a lot of dissemination activity, priming the pump and so on. A midterm review is more like a standard academy study. There's a single group of people, probably 15 to 20 people. There won't be a white paper process. There'll be a lot of invited presentations. People may be asked to comment. The academy analysis groups and maybe RCNs probably will be asked to comment on, how well they think the NASA has been at, and NSF has been at implementing the recommendations. The midterms also look at, what has changed in the scientific background. Has there been some significant discovery or new technology or whatever that might cause changes to be made? Okay. But the midterms particularly don't change the basic prioritization. They're not going to add missions. It's more of a correcting activity, and it's probably most important in actually defining how the statement of tasks for the next decadal survey gets written.
Okay. Well, anything else? We've lost a chunk of people, but it's the opportunity to ask David.
Well, you know where I am, and yeah. I can, if you want me to come back, or you want somebody else to come back, or if you want to know more about one of the missions.
So on that note, my question would be if you'd provide us with and this would be Alfonso or David actually, the top 3 kind of insider details as to why Europa lander was down selected and Enceladus was up selected. Is that the term?
Well, I mean, we don't discuss the internal deliberations, and so the report, the report basically says, why we didn't go for Europa. It just basically boiled down to, you go to Enceladus, you can be there for years, you can orbit for several years, you can land and survive for several years. On Europa, the lifetime is limited, no matter what you do to that spacecraft, and that's one of the main reasons. The Europa lander, as it was presented to us, would have been an extremely expensive mission, much more expensive than Orbit Lander. That's 2 of the reasons, but the report lays them out.
Do you have recommendations for those people that wrote proposals in the past that were dedicated towards Europa, but for the most part can be applicable to Enceladus? I'm speaking on behalf of anybody.
Yeah, I suspect a lot of the work that was done for Europa Lander is directly applicable to Enceladus. I mean, maybe not the radiation hardening, because you don't need to worry about that at Europa, at Enceladus. But certainly that group, Peter Willis's group at JPL, I think they were originally all oriented towards Europa Lander, and I think now they're changing direction more towards Enceladus. But,
I mean, I think there's a variety.
I don't think the work is the money that was spent on Europa Lander, probably most of it has not been wasted, which might be the impression some people will give. $300 million of investment in Europa Lander. That's how some people might describe it, was down the drain because we decided Europa was a more important target.
And I think
And I think even at your panel level, Alfonso, there was not that much interest in Europa Lander as compared to an Decadal Survey.
Well,
I
there
think that's
was,
giving away any secrets.
yeah, there was definitely, there were also scientific arguments put forth for one versus the other, and everything weighted. But I should say that the Europa Lander is not a dead mission. There is a real scenario where the Orbi Lander doesn't get initiated this decade, because it's technically the third flagship priority after sample return and Uranus. And Europa Clipper is going to bring a lot of interesting data. So the next decadal survey with the Europa Clipper data might decide that now Europa is more interesting than Enceladus scientifically or technically or whatever. So as David,
Not just Europa, Europa Clipper, but there's JUICE as well.
yeah.
So the next survey, which will be in the early 2030s, will have a lot of new Europa data
Yeah, I
as
think
part of their deliberations. So it
Yeah,
might be best placed.
I take what came out in the decadal. Obviously, you cannot have every mission. It's one of the painful activities of the decadal is to prioritize, and sometimes you prioritize good and very good, and it can be painful. But the fact that there is a flagship live detection mission mentioned in the proposal, which is a first in the history of the decadal, that to me is the important takeaway, and that tells you that sometime in the next 20 years, 30 years, very likely there's going to be a live detection flagship going somewhere, which is great.
I guess what I'm trying to understand is if for researchers who have proposals, maybe not even tech dev, but also people that have research sites, for example, who have focused their efforts on Europa-like ecosystems, or even tech. Sorry, what?
Sorry, I interrupted you. Keep going.
Yeah, so the question is, do they attempt to try to morph their system into Enceladus to make it more applicable to a NASA exobiology proposal, or do you stick to your guns and continue? Because like Alfonso said, there's still the chance, right? We're going to get more information with Europa Clipper. And again, this isn't for me, this is kind of for everybody. Like there are definitely people who have focused on Europa because that was the prior concept.
I don't, I mean, personally speaking, I don't see any reason why they should necessarily refocus, because Europa is going to be highly relevant in the next decade. So, I mean, keep studying Europa. We're going to learn more and more about Europa as this decade proceeds, even before Clipper gets there, given interest in possible plumes and so on. We shouldn't forget Europa.
Yeah, and the relevance of research is not just based on the missions, but those chapters, which also are state what is relevant in research. Europa is very, very well represented in the chapters.
Yeah, actually, I just for my own amusement, I did a search on keywords yesterday, and Europa is mentioned 206 times in the report, and Enceladus is mentioned 216 times. So it's pretty equal to some word count. For contrast, Mars is mentioned 892 times. And surprisingly, life is mentioned more times than planet by a factor of 50%. So 900 mentions of the word life, only 600 planet or planetary. Life detection 76 times. Astrobiology almost 400 times. So,
yes, yeah.
So I think you have lots of stuff to mine in the Decadal Survey as it exists now.
Okay.
Any more questions, comments?
Thank you for coming, David.
Okay, sure, it's a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, David, again, and thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for participating. And
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, David.
Oh, can you point me to the where you'll put the recording and where you put the announcements for these events in the future? Because you know, our Space Studies Board has interns. We have 2 at the moment, and I'm always looking for other things they can listen into to
Oh, absolutely.
broaden their education.
Yep, I think Bradley will make those, make that information available.
Thank you.
Yes, yeah, I got that.
Okay,
Thank you, David.
bye-bye.
Bye. All right, well, thanks, everybody. I think, Brooke, do you want
I was
to?
gonna say, I don't know if Pablo, Lori, or Dina are there. C is still here. If we want to have any kind of NfoLD specific discussion, this is just more for fun.
Yeah, not that, I mean, I think this is enough to start thinking about where we can do some damage with this information. So I don't have any more brain things to offer here. Yeah.
Are you, did you have a chance to, Paulo, to, I'm not gonna say read the entire document, but glance through it or take a look or?
Very diagonally. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, no, I look at the mission concepts. I think I was very interested to see what the focus was of the panels on those. And yeah, I mean, but I don't have any complaints or any praise either. Yes.
Useful.
Yeah.
Bradley, did you stop the recording?
Okay, I'll stop it right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the reminder.
Oh,
Yeah.